We begin with a small celebration at a power station. The workers were celebrating a colleague's birthday when suddenly they saw something strange on the surveillance cameras. A shadow was moving in the opening, and then a mysterious creature attacked. The man tried to retreat to the office, but a group of monsters caught up with him and began killing everyone in the building. When the eclipse covered the sun, the creature started appearing all over the planet, killing millions of people and devastating cities. The news called it the Day of Reckoning, and soldiers were sent to fight these monsters in a war that lasted throughout the eclipse. Millions of lives were lost, and massive amounts of resources were depleted in the battle. In the end, all the creatures were eradicated, and humanity began to rebuild. They designed protective structures called gateways, in case the creatures decided to return. 15 years passed, and the world was living a normal life again. Dave worked as a garbage collector for a poorly paid company, and his task was to enter the openings to remove dead animals. Laura, who used to be married to Dave but divorced a long time ago, now worked as a school teacher and became friends with Milton, a fellow teacher who always teased her to go out with him. Laura finally agreed today to Milton's invitation after resolving some lingering issues between them. At the same time, Laura's son Tyler meets his girlfriend Maddie, who is concerned about the upcoming eclipse phenomenon. Tyler reassures her not to worry, because there have been many eclipses in the past 15 years without any incidents. Meanwhile, Officer Jarrett receives a call from the workers at one of the gateways, requesting his presence to investigate a significant seismic activity. The request is approved, and when Jarrett arrives at the gateway, he senses that this time it is not a drill. They inspect all the systems, but suddenly, the electrical box explodes, causing them to lose the entire network. In the city, Dave goes to Laura's house to pick up Tyler, but when the boy was playing video games, the parents had a heated argument. It turns out that Laura was pregnant with Tyler during the previous disaster, but Dave wasn't with her at that time, and she hasn't forgiven him yet. Tyler interrupts them and leaves with his father. Later, in the middle of the night, Dave receives a call from his uncle, Ted, who is certain that the new day of reckoning will be tomorrow. Ted invites Dave to bring his family to his fortified shelter before the eclipse begins. Tyler watches the news in distress as he sees millions of dead fish appearing on the beaches everywhere. This was one of the signs that emerged in the past 15 years. At that moment, the first monster appears at the gateway and starts climbing the stairs. Meanwhile, Laura calls Dave and tells him that she saw the news and wants Tyler to come back home because Milton reserved a spot in the shelter. Dave argues, and in the meantime, Tyler receives a message instructing him to leave the house secretly. When Dave tries to find him, he only finds a note with Maddie and Milton's phone numbers, urging Laura to hurry because the shelter is filling up fast. Laura informs Dave that Tyler has left, and Milton uses the boy's phone number to track his location using a special program. They find him at the train park with Maddie, who was worried and afraid because her parents abandoned her. Tyler promises her that he is not like his father and will never leave her alone. But suddenly, they heard a loud noise, and a large flock of birds appeared in the sky. It was another sign of the reckoning, and people in the park panicked. They ran in fear, and the roads were filled with families trying to leave the city. David was stuck in the crowd, but when he saw the birds flying, he abandoned his car and continued on foot. At the gateway, the workers were inspecting the systems when they heard strange noises. Suddenly, a monster appeared and began attacking one of the men. The neighbors ran, and the soldiers opened fire, but it seemed that the regular bullets had no effect on the creature. After a few moments, the emergency sirens started blaring, filling the entire city with their sound. Fortunately, Laura appeared with Milton, and they took the three of them in Milton's car. They had about an hour left before the eclipse, and the city was in complete chaos. Everyone was trying to escape, causing heavy traffic on all the roads. The family was stuck for a while and saw fanatics walking around the cars, scaring the drivers with their colorful masks. These fanatics believed that the end was near. Finally, Milton saw an opportunity, accelerated as fast as possible, and managed to get the family to safety. But unfortunately, even there was chaos with many people trying to get inside. At the same time, the military announced that only women and children were allowed. Dave told Tyler to go with Laura and Maddie to the shelter. Tyler regretted his decision and returned to his father, telling him he would never leave him behind. The women caught up to them outside. At that moment, the announcement board declared that the power was running out. The group ran back to the car and discussed their available options. Steve wanted to go to the Desert Bakery, but Milton suggested hiding in the school because it was closer and had a basement. However, they soon found themselves stuck in another traffic jam, so they got out of the car when an earthquake hit the area. The eclipse had begun, with the world entering darkness, and monsters started emerging, immediately taking over the city and mercilessly killing, just like what happened 15 years ago. Dave insisted they had to leave the city and wanted to drive, but Milton got upset because it was his car, and he knew how to save everyone. They got into a heated argument, which was interrupted when a flying monster descended and abducted Milton and Laura. Dave pushed Laura into the car and took the wheel to get his family out of the city at last. As they drove alongside the canal, they discussed theories about the origin of the monsters and wondered if these creatures were soldiers sent by God or not. Eventually, the car ran out of fuel and Dave wanted to find a replacement. He parked next to a group of abandoned cars and started searching inside until he discovered corpses in some of them. Finally, he found an empty one and got inside, but he noticed the driver hiding behind the passenger seat, warning him that a monster was nearby. The beast was circling the cars, looking for more victims. When it passed by the other people, thankfully, it didn't notice them, and Dave continued his journey. Later, the monster found one of the corpses and started eating it. So Dave slowly rolled the car past it, being careful not to alert the creature. Now, the two cars were parked next to each other, and Laura and the children tried to move from one car to the other. Although they were very quiet, the monster noticed them and chased after them. The older man fell out of the car, and the monster attacked him, so Dave sprinkled salt on it, momentarily stopping the creature. Then, he jumped on the monster and started fighting back. The family took advantage of this opportunity and finally drove away from the area, taking a deserted road in the mountains. Swarms of monsters were gathering around the city from all directions. In the end, they reached the hiding place, a real, strong concrete building with closed doors and cameras on the roof. However, no one came out when the family started screaming and banging on the door, hoping to get inside. What they didn't know was that Ted was sitting at his computer, watching them through the cameras, with someone holding a gun to his head. At that moment, hordes of monsters appeared in the mountains and started running towards the hiding place, causing the family to become even more tense. Dave grabbed a spare key to protect his family, but eventually the door to the hiding place finally opened and they went inside. The family met Ted and his wife Stella, but they were surprised to find out that their daughter had run away, and it turned out that Ted's father was a friend of Dave's in the war and had separated from his unit and came here seeking help. Dave became suspicious when he noticed that their neighbor was carrying a gun, and this made him question him. Later, they all gathered together, but they couldn't stop noticing on the screens how the monsters were trying to break down the door, which made everyone even more anxious. Even the radio was useless because all they could hear were screams. Maddie asked how the monsters could sense them, and their neighbor explained that they react to light and heat. However, he wondered if they could also see people's souls. He also shared his own story of how he survived the first Judgment Day, and mentioned that he used to work in an oil refinery. When the monsters entered there, he managed to dive into a salty mud pool and buried himself. He could hear the monsters killing all his colleagues and neighbors while he was busy telling his story. Ted then urged Dave to hold and hide the knife, but without realizing it, there was a crocodile-like monster crawling through a small opening in the mesh on the window. Then the neighbor announced that he would be the first one to take guard duty. Ted convinced the others to play a card game instead of sleeping, and Dave looked at her with a meaningful glance. But the neighbor noticed the signal and pulled out the gun from his holster, instructing Dave to put down the knife. He explained that Ted was initially against the idea but sympathized with Stella and narrowly escaped death himself, determined to survive at any cost. Suddenly, Tiller threw himself at the neighbor, trying to take the gun, but the neighbor pushed him away, resulting in a fierce scuffle. However, Maddie intervened and warned them that they couldn't hear the monsters anymore. Then, the crocodile-like creature emerged from the wall and bit Stella. While Ted was restraining the creature by its neck and spraying salt on it, Dave hit the neighbor to take his gun and attempted to strike the creature. But Maddie managed to kill it with the knife. Afterward, they tied up the neighbor and tried to stop Stella's bleeding, but they needed medical attention urgently. At that moment, they noticed on the screen that a large monster was continuously pounding on the front door trying to enter. Dave suggested they should leave, but Ted refused to go outside and insisted that his wife couldn't leave either. Stella wanted him to go, and she had an idea about the underground passage beneath the bank that led to the mountains. The neighbor mentioned that he had a car full of gasoline and could take everyone to the gate, but the group was skeptical until the neighbor convinced them and said he would benefit from helping them. They decided to stick together, but first, Ted revealed that he had a complete arsenal of weapons, and everyone armed themselves. While the group was entering the tunnel, Dave opened the front door and detonated the first monster that entered before the rest could catch up. After the tunnel closed securely, they emerged outside and noticed that Stella was struggling as she walked, as she was beginning to transform into a monster herself. Then, as they were walking on the road, Tiller spotted a motionless creature appearing dead. Maddie attempted to touch it, but Tiller stopped her. However, when she turned around, a long arm emerged from a hole in the ground. She held onto her legs and tried to pull them, and Maddie screamed loudly. Tyler and Dave held her, and Laura struck her arm to make her snap out of it. After Maddie was freed, they all ran, and Laura convinced Dave to let go of her so he could help if there was another attack, which the others didn't know. What they didn't know was that Dave was hiding an injury in his arm. After a while, they reached the mountaintop and saw the city burning. When they found a nearby car, they realized it was destroyed. In that moment, creatures appeared at the top of the mountain and started running towards them. Laura tried to start the engine again, and Stella held Ted's gun to end her life before she fully transformed. Ted fought her off as she transformed, and eventually took the gun back and begged her to get into the car. But Dave knew there was no hope, and pulled Ted away, and Stella watched as the creatures quickly devoured her. Finally, Guard managed to start the car, and the group escaped, leaving the creatures behind. On the way, they received a radio signal and heard that almost all the shelters had been unable to withstand the attack and were destroyed. Finally, they reached the gate, but there was no response on the radio, and the gate was open. The group cautiously entered and discovered there was no electricity. Laura and Dave decided to fix it while the others searched for a first aid kit because they discovered that Ted was injured in his back. Finally, everyone took care of Ted and Dave returned after escaping. Guard explained that the gate was prepared for a second invasion and was filled with salt water, but the hole was too deep. When the electricity came back, Dave and Laura started to return to the group, but suddenly Guard felt blood dripping on his hand and looked up to see a corpse. At the same time, something in the darkness made a loud noise, and the two ran back to the group to discuss the available options, as they still had 2 hours until the eclipse ended. Guard suggested hiding in a chemical storage room because its doors were blast resistant. As they left the first aid room, a transformed creature attacked Laura, and Dave fought it with the others to defeat it. However, the noise they made attracted more creatures. She was very scared and ran to the door, locked it behind her, and left everyone behind. Then she gave herself an injection to resist the transformation and secured her family in another room. She noticed distribution lines indicating a tank on the other side of the wall. which gave her an idea. She made a plan to redirect the salt water through the tank's pipes to prevent the creatures. Before Laura could act on this idea, the door broke, and she ran while Dave walked through the ventilation and noticed a creature feasting on its prey in the room. When he reached the tank, he tried to stay calm and opened the faucet. The water started filling the containers, and Dave returned, but the creature sensed him and started chasing him. Dave fought back by throwing salt at it, causing the creature to disintegrate into dust. At the same time, the others found themselves surrounded by creatures, and Tyler opened fire on them. Suddenly, they heard Dave's voice through the speakers, asking them to activate the fire alarm. The creatures were getting closer, so Ted said to Tyler that they only needed to jump on one creature at once and kill it quickly. Tyler continued shooting until he ran out of ammunition, then activated the fire alarm and let the salt water start descending on the creatures. They disintegrated into dust, screaming in agony. At that moment, the eclipse ended, and all the creatures started returning to their world through the gate. However, this triggered another earthquake, and Laura and the children tried to move again. Before that, Laura ran, and the one who was starting to regain his sanity due to the transformation attacked Ted and hit him in the shoulder. Before he could strike again, another guest appeared behind him and hit Guard in the head with a fire extinguisher. David gathered his family again, but a large creature emerged from below and pounced on Laura, swallowing her whole. The family ran and entered the medical unit, where they made a saline mixture in a cylinder and threw it at the creature as soon as it broke through the door. They killed it instantly. After that, the family went outside and saw that the world had been completely destroyed. But now they were ready to rebuild from scratch. And here is where the true beginning lies. However, the real beginning that you need to do is to support our relationship by subscribing to the channel. Thank you for watching. We wish you all the happiness. See you soon.